Because I suppose the whole fear thing is right fresh in my mind right now, and a lot of people fear loneliness, particularly when they come to old age.
Loneliness is lethal.
Yeah, and how do you, if you're going through that fear, what can you do about it? If you're feeling lonely?
If you're feeling lonely, then the first thing you do is, first of all, it depends on what's causing the loneliness. So, for instance, social media is going to make you very lonely, because when we talked about this before, so I won't go into it. But social media effectively removes all control from you, because there's all sorts of clever algorithms keeping you online as much as possible, so you can look at the advertising, and it therefore increases your stress, lowers your serotonin, and makes you depressed and lonely. Now that's different to being an old person, and an old person who's socially disintegrated through the fact that we don't have any so we have less and less close family network and less children, so you're more likely to find lonely old people. Now that's different to a young person using social media who's artificially lonely. So a young person using social media needs to cut down on the social media. And what's more and more worrying, of course, is that a lot of people doing the programming themselves, the programming of the algorithms that run the advertising on social media, actually have Asperger's syndrome, because Asperger's run by sheer logic. They don't understand emotion. They have much less access to emotional intelligence, and therefore our everyday world is running more and more by people who are actually pathological. Think about that for a second. Our future is in the hands of pathological humans setting up machines to run in their image, controlling the rest of us. That's what's waiting for us. And Elon Musk has Asperger's.
Okay, Theo, we need to get back on track now, babe.
That's a very serious point.
Before we start losing our audience here.
No, that's a very serious point, because that's the reality of what's happening. And you asked me what to do, so the first thing is come off social media, and quite frankly there should be legislation against how that's managed. The second is, if you're a lonely old person, that's a state thing. That's a state issue. They need to be desperately reintegrated. And whenever I see a lonely old person chatting to their supermarket checkout, I have infinite patience. I used to get really impatient until now I understand the issue. You know what I started doing? I started going over and chatting to them as well and forming a little group, because that is desperate. That's their only social interaction they have. But it really is up to the children and to society to legislate to bring these old people back into our communities.
Okay, because one thing I want to do, I really wanted to discuss it, and we discussed it yesterday or the day before yesterday, was really about emotional intelligence, and how you control your emotional intelligence situation. Because when we go through that stage where we lose control of our emotions and things like this, it shows. Does it show that you got a low emotional intelligence threshold, or does it mean that everyone has it and you can nurture it?
Okay, so there's two components there. So the real emotional intelligence is your ability to understand how someone else is feeling. That's emotional intelligence. But I know that's not the answer you're looking for, so I'm going to come to that in a second.
No. I think you need to think awareness of other people is just as important.
Your ability to empathise is incredibly important, because that makes you a social animal, and that's how we are. That's how we've evolved. And of course, because of that, the more you're able to empathise, the more likeable you are, and that will affect hugely the success you have in life. So, for instance, Oppenheimer, who invented the atomic bomb, he came close to being kicked out of, I think it was Oxford University, but he charmed the dean. He charmed the dean into giving him a second chance. There's another case of someone equally intelligent, if not more intelligent than Oppenheimer, who got kicked out of Oxford because he effectively had Asperger's. So now he's left doing quiz shows 50-1, where he pits himself against 50 contestants. So that's the difference in outcome between those who are emotionally intelligent and those who are not. Charmers are emotionally intelligent. They have to be. Now, in terms of...
But it means they've got less empathy.
Not necessarily. they can understand someone's emotions. Whether they choose to act on them and care about them is something different, and that determines different personalities.
That's interesting because it brings up an interesting point that's just come into my mind, and it's to do with you talk about being likable, and there's people who are likable, and there's people who actually do everything they can to be likable, so they become I don't know what it's called.
People pleasers.
People pleasers, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, how do you define between being a people pleaser and just being likable?
Because the people pleasers are likable, but they gorge their entire self.
Are they really? Because I know plenty of people pleasers who
they become annoying.
Hound the hell out of me, and I've got very little respect for them.
Well, fair enough, but again, it depends, because you're exceptionally intuitive, so therefore you will see what they're doing a lot quicker than someone else might. But I take your point.
Do we not also? I think I suppose the model of my world, I think everybody can see it.
Okay, let's get back to the point. So the issue is that these people pleasers live their life gorging themselves by other people's responses to them. So therefore they don't have any self-worth. Their self-worth depends on other people's response to them, and what it is this: it's people pleasers themselves. It's a type of pathology. It is a response to their own anxiety. So if you look at your baseline level of anxiety, we're all different. So if you can imagine an engine idle speed of a car, engine idle speed, the average engine idle speed is what we all go at. We all have our basic anxiety, which is our survival anxiety. But then some people idle higher. Now, those of us who idle higher are controlled by our amygdala, by a hardwired need to reflexly reduce it. And we all find different ways of doing it. So some people will become people pleasers, and that's the way they work out of reducing their anxiety and about making themselves feel good. Other people will excessively diet. Other people will become addicts. Other people will go to the gym a lot. So there's all sorts of different ways that we seek to reflexly reduce our anxiety, and those people pleasers do live their life constantly trying to please people to reduce their anxiety and feel calm.
Interesting. So,
but it's an illusionary need.
Yes, of course. Because just before we start wrapping this up, there was one thing I wanted to add. So, obviously from the scenario, obviously from the scenario that we talked about, what happened earlier in the week, and the mistake that I made of learning the long passage and then having to recite it and putting myself under a level of pressure that really I shouldn't have got. I shouldn't have put myself under had I not made that mistake in the first place. Because I did a lot of self-reflection afterwards on this, and I think everyone should do a lot of self-reflection as to what happened, what can I do better next time. Mm-hmm. So I made a decision over the last couple of days and realised that I was beginning to spread myself too thin in too many different directions. I was being pulled, which meant I wasn't able to focus on particularly one thing, because what you focus on expands. And because I wasn't focusing, I was all over the place, I started to lose control, I started to lose structure. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people are in that position because I meet them on a daily basis. And one of the biggest, more powerful things you can actually have, or decisions you can make, is learn to say no. Mm-hmm. On a more regular basis. So I looked at everything that was actually happening in my life right now, and there are several things that have happened in the month of January that I would have had to. Most people have to deal with over a period of 6 months. So I had to sort of say, look, I need to consolidate what my position is right now and start taking out things that are less of a priority. Because you can actually be mediocre across the board, or you can actually sort of meet the standards that you're meant to achieve in certain areas. Mm-hmm. And people don't do that because we don't want. And you talk about likable. Some part of the reason about being likable is actually saying yes to too many things.
So you're giving yourself a dose of realism.
Well, there's a dose of realism. I think it's for everybody. No, not just for me. But it is a dose of realism for a lot of people.
Let's translate that further and simplify realism into self-awareness, and this is one of the fundamental mistakes of most of psychological teaching and therapy. Because what psychologists will do is they'll try and get you to manage your anxiety better, whereas you can't, because we just spent most of this talk discussing how we're hardwired to reflexly. Reflexly takes volitional thought out of the equation. That's what we just said. Therefore, what you need to do is be self-aware. In other words, not, I've got this anxiety, I've got to do something about it. No, I have this anxiety is all you need to do. Once you, and this is in fact what it's one or two branches of psychology are beginning to do, which is they're saying, hang on a second, just label it as an anxious thought and leave it there non-judgmentally. Once you do that, then you say, look, I don't have to change myself, because if you're naturally anxious, we're not talking about pathological anxiety, we're talking about natural levels of anxiety, because some of us have more, some of us have less. So that's how I am. I don't have to change myself. I am anxious. That's okay. Now let's have a look at what I really want to do. So that's true self-awareness. Okay? Not trying to change yourself and then focusing on what you really want to do rather than being controlled by your anxiety.
Well, thank you for that. Actually, there's one thing I want you to share this on, because you brought it up on the last podcast, and that was about your Greek neighbour and the anchor.
Okay, so
do you want to share that one with us?
Yes. So I'm Greek as well, obviously, but I was talking to my friend, and I saw outside his house he's got an anchor, bless him, because his father used to work in shipping, and on it were two ancient Greek words. One was gnothia afton, and I said, what does that mean? And he said, know thyself. And I said, okay, what's the word underneath mean? And he said, but not too much. And that's what Socrates said, and Socrates was the ancient Greek philosopher. And I thought, what genius, what utter genius! Because
well, what does it mean? What does it mean to our audience?
That separates us humans from machines. Know thyself means exactly that. Know yourself. Know who you are, what you're doing. But not too much means, but you can't over-control yourself. So, for instance, a patient who comes to me and says, I've decided it's time to change, I must become a less anxious person. You are who you are. The first thing you have to do is accept yourself. So what it's saying is, know thyself, be self-aware, but accept you're human. And of course, that's not what a computer has to do. A computer just has to define the parameters and then get on with it, because they're not human. And again, that takes us back to the problem with our lives being controlled by computers who are programmed by Asperger's syndrome people. So what genius? Know thyself, but not too much. Enjoy who you are.
Well, I think that's a very good note to actually end it on. So thank you for listening, guys. We hope you will tune in next week, where we'll have another exciting topical talkology talk, and see if we can actually give you some insight into some of the things that are actually happening in everybody's everyday lives. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.